Okay, folks, welcome to the Top 5 Salesforce Web-to-Lead Implementation Tips webinar. We're going to go ahead and get started. Today's presentation, like I said a minute ago, is just a reminder that it is 30 minutes, so we are going to move along pretty quickly, get through these tips. If I do have time, I may go to the chat log and answer some questions there. But if not, please do, any unanswered questions that you want to discuss. There is a RingLead user group on LinkedIn, and that's where we can follow up with any post-webinar questions. Also, this webinar is being recorded, so later on, if folks are watching this on the internet, they too can then join in on the conversation. So it's kind of a nice way to collaborate. So my name is Michael Farrington. I'm the Chief Product Officer of RingLead. And I'm also the founder of Candor that makes a few well-known apps like Field Trip and Drag and Roll that are on the App Exchange as well. Put a few bullet points here. So I feel a little awkward, I guess, talking about myself. Salesforce MVP, Force.com MVP, and a lot of other certifications and accolades. I guess to sum it all up, the best way I like to sum it all up is that I'm a huge Force.com and Salesforce.com geek. Maybe is the best way to put it, and I like to focus all my energy on that, which is why I joined an awesome company like RingLead, so I can work on App Exchange apps full time, and it's something I'm very passionate about. More specifically about today's topic, I just wanted to add in a slide here and explain a little bit about my experience with Web-to-Lead and why I chose to put together this content. And so I've got large enterprise experience where I actually kind of, like I say, paid my dues as a system administrator for many years for a mid-sized enterprise that then was acquired by a larger enterprise. And that whole time, working as system administrator, had a variety of use cases for Web-to-Lead and Web-to-Case forms as well. Also, small business. So, like I said, I founded Candor, so I had as small as even just a one-person org. Totally different use cases, different requirements there. And so I was able to leverage Force.com sites to display like a contact us form. And we'll talk about that, the sites versus Web-to-Lead in just a minute, actually. And of course, like I said, now, I work for the awesome company of RingLead, who's, they're cool enough to let me put together content like this and share it with the Salesforce community, even though it's only minimally related to necessarily to what my position is in the company. But they're just so interested in helping the Salesforce community that they let me put on these awesome presentations. So just kind of a shout out to my colleagues for putting up with me ignoring their emails while I put things like this put shows like this on. It's really cool of them. And of course, we have a product called Unique Web-to-Lead, which will actually, as your information is being captured from your web form, it will ensure that it's not a duplicate before it even hits your database. Very cool product. So those are really the bullet points of my experience with Web-to-Lead, and just kind of taking three different angles on the topic. Let's go ahead and jump right into the content. Because I know that, like I said, I want to be sensitive to everyone's time, don't want to run over. So the first tip is to research Force.com sites. And now, a second ago, I mentioned that. And really, the reason I put this as the first tip is, if you're implementing a Web-to-Lead form, there are other options. And one of those is Force.com sites. And so you want to make sure that if you're, depending on what you're going to capture, and depending on really what your team looks like, right? Who's going to be supporting this form going forward? There's going to be benefits to hosting a Force.com site versus, creating a Web-to-Lead form and posting that on some other website. So a few things about Force.com sites, if you didn't know. Force.com sites allows you to create visual force pages. They don't have to be, strict visual force pages, obviously HTML and JavaScript in there. And you can share those externally, right? So you don't have to be logged in. You can just go to a website and see this content. And so it can be a single web page. That's the first bullet point I put here, because that's actually what I've done in the past is if you need to just capture one form's worth of information, you can actually create a single web page Force.com site, and you could use that in kind of a mashup with other sites. You could direct people there. If they click on a link that says contact us somewhere, it brings them to your Force.com site, and they're basically creating a record directly in your Salesforce org by filling out a form on a Force.com site. It's essentially, once you go that route and you create a Force.com site, it's web to really anything. The sky's the limit. So it's worth looking into if you're not just creating web-to-lead or web-to-case. You want to create other things, you can use Force.com sites for that. And you'd be less dependent on a web developer for updates. And the reason I say that is because Force.com sites, it's a little bit more like your internal page layouts, in that if you were to go ahead and let's say make changes to pick list values, that could automatically be updated or reflected in your Force.com site web page immediately. So definitely some advantages there of a lot more upfront developer requirements, right? Or the requirement for a developer resource to go live with the Force.com site. But once it's up, there are some definite benefits of okay, now we're not as dependent on a developer. We can go and make some changes ourselves right in Salesforce. And it comes with Enterprise Edition and Unlimited Edition. It does depend on the traffic to the site, though. It may make maybe an additional cost if you have a lot of traffic. So, and just one more additional note on this is that if you're curious or maybe you're confused, if you've heard Site.com, Site.com is basically a drag and drop editor. Allows you to create Force.com sites just a lot easier. It's a much more user-friendly way to create a Force.com site. And so it is an additional cost, but again, if you want to be less dependent on a developer, that's something you should look into as well. So once you've kind of measured up the alternatives there, we're going to jump into the tips of actually implementing this, right? So the first tip, once you've decided you're going to implement a web-to-lead form, leverage hidden inputs. So this is like an old trick, and it's one that if you've generated the code in Salesforce for a web-to-lead form, you might have seen a few hidden inputs in there. And we're going to go and I'm going to actually give you a real-world example of this. I think I should have time to do this. So we're going to do like a live example of what you might use this for. But basically, I describe it as form-specific default values, which basically means they're hidden to the user who's entering information into the form. But behind the scenes, the form is saying, hey, when this submit button is clicked, I'm going to populate a few additional fields, or you can actually even add that lead to a campaign using these hidden inputs as well. So let me flip over now. I'm going to do a little bit of live magic. So I'm in a Salesforce org here, and I'm just going to go to the setup. I'm sure you guys are familiar. I'm sure you can tell me where to go, most of you. So if I go to Customize and Leads, and there's the section here, Web to Lead. And I'm going to click the button to create a Web to Lead form. And so if you've never seen this before, this is, I'm literally going to create a form and save it on my desktop and open it in the browser. It's that easy to generate this code. But as the kind of the description for this webinar hinted at, there's a lot of things you have to think about before you do that. So very easy to spin up the code though. So I'm going to add a couple of our fields in here. I'm going to choose blood type, background, and let's say rating. Okay, and now this return URL, we're going to actually come back to that later and I'll talk about it. But okay, so I've generated this basic HTML, right? And I'm going to say I want to copy it, and I want to drop it into some sort of a text editor. I'm just going to use a simple one that I grabbed, but you might want to, there are much more efficient HTML editors out there in the market, but I'm just going to use Notepad right here real quick just to give you guys an example. So let me get rid of some of the commented code. Okay, so these fields here, and stick with me. If you're not a developer and you're looking at this like, oh great, he's geeking out, he's getting into some code. Stick with me for a minute, and I think you're gonna it's not as hard as it looks, not as difficult as it looks to make the types of changes that I'm going to demonstrate. So input type, basically an input is like a field or selector, things like that on a web form. And when it says type equals hidden, those are the ones that I'm talking about. Those are the hidden values that we're sending. So in this case, it's the org ID is already being sent as a hidden field, and the return value, which is the URL that the user will go to when they submit the form. And what we want to do, just to give you an example, I could come down here and let's say take rating, and I'm going to copy all the text for the rating field, right? This is actually a pick list of hot, warm, cold, and I'm going to cut it out of there. I'm going to go paste it in with our inputs up here, the hidden inputs. So if I do some, oh, sorry, I just want to get rid of the label because we're not going to display anything. And I basically just want to make it match, make it look just like our examples, right? They've already given me some examples of hidden inputs. So let me see if I can, I don't usually do much live coding. It's definitely easy. Watching the experts at Salesforce do this during Dreamforce, they definitely make it look easy, but it's not. So name, rating, and then we'll just give it like a value, just like they have. So value equals hot, right? Let's keep it capitalized. And that's really it. And then all these options and all this, kind of delete that. So you can see there, what I've done is now when this form gets submitted, the user is not actually going to be saying, okay, yeah, I'm a hot lead. That doesn't really make much sense. But maybe because of this form, this is a particular form that they would only get to if they were really interested. So we can say the rating is going to just default to hot when they submit this form. I'm not going to save this and test it out right now. We don't have time. I'm going to come back to that later after we make some more changes. But that's the concept. And now the thing is, let me go back to my presentation. And so the thing here is that we're adding desired fields using the wizard, and then we're modifying the HTML slightly. Again, you don't really have to be like a coding expert to do that. If you're going to eventually involve a developer, you could have them take a look at what you've changed just to make sure it's working. But it's not rocket science. And then, so here's the last point I wanted to make. You can also do this using workflow. So you definitely want to weigh your options, meaning that you could have some sort of a default field, like just one single value that tells you, maybe it's lead source, for example, is a good one. You could have your lead source tell Salesforce that, this particular form is the one that was filled out. So, form XYZ versus ABC, that gets a different lead source, right? And based on that lead source, you can then have workflow update, any number of fields. So that might be more attractive to you because, again, if you're considering, all right, we don't want to have to go to a developer or go to our web development team to have them change, one little minor thing. We want to take more control in Salesforce. Then you might want to just use workflow to do these updates. That way, when it hits the database, it'll look at lead source or whatever it is that's identifying it as being from that form. It'll just update those fields with workflow. It's kind of a nice alternative. So here's another huge tip that I've used a lot, and I guess a lot of times it's overlooked, is the field types can differ from Salesforce. And what that means is, I put here capture data however you want, right? It's kind of like taking some poetic license. But for example, you can capture a text field as a pick list instead. So if you have, in Salesforce, you've got a field like background actually is one that we've added to our field, our form. I'm going to change that to a pick list and show you how that's done. And or you could capture, maybe you have a pick list on your back end, right? You've created like that rating that we had just now, cold, warm, hot. We could change that actually to use radio buttons instead of a pick list. And you can also modify the available pick list values. So maybe on the form to your users, you want that, you know, to the world basically, right? You want it to show up with fewer pick list values or more pick list values, whatever it is. You know, you have to be careful there, because whatever values you have in your form, they will get entered into that field, even if they're not a pick list value in Salesforce. It will actually get updated. So then you might have data that doesn't sync with your pick list values. You might have to go do some cleanup. But so you should be careful when doing this. But you know, the gist here is that we can modify this, and the UI that the users are entering to enter information, that doesn't have to identically match what you would see on your own page layouts when you're filling in those fields. So let's go ahead and escape out of here. So I'm gonna show you that in real time. I'm gonna try to do some of that. So if I go back to our notepad here, so you can see now, like as we looked at the rest of the fields here, you can see that we're capturing name, first name, last name, email, company. That's all great. And then down here you have we have background, actually, which is just a text input. And basically what we could do is, you know, you can, I mean, here again it's copying and pasting. So we could steal some code down here. This is blood type is a pick list value. So you've got all these different values that you can select from. So we could come up here. We could kind of like paste this in, and oh, I'm sorry. Actually, I pasted the same code from before from the rating, but actually that'll work too. We can get rid of this and just say, basically want to say our background now, and we want to say copy these IDs. Just bear with me while I'm doing this. It'll be worth it. So name, and we want to say our options now will be, let's get rid of one of them, and we just want to have some pick list values in here of, and maybe their background is that they're a bad guy or a good guy. How about that? And you're gonna let them pick. I don't know who would pick bad, but there might be someone out there. So their background. So now we've put in here this, and we want to get rid of this, obviously. So now instead of capturing a text field, we're going to capture it as a pick list, but it's going to be stored in Salesforce right into our text field. So it's kind of nice. And then, like I said before, I mean, if we wanted to, we could come down here and let's say we don't want any B-negative blood types. No offense to anyone, not discriminating. But if I want to delete that, I can just delete that. And now the people who are filling in this web form are not going to be able to use that value anymore. All right, let's go ahead and try this out. I'm going to say, save this form, and hopefully hopefully there aren't any. I do apologize at this point. I'm not keeping an eye on the comments, so hopefully I didn't make any typos that you people are screaming about. I will look at those if we have time, though, at the end. So, just in case. Okay, I'm just going to save this to my desktop, which is why I have part of it exposed on my desktop. And so if I now open this in a browser, there we go. So I didn't put a carriage return in here, but you can see that we can fill out the first name. So webinar test. All right, and now the background could be, you know, bad guy or good guy. Let's choose good guy. And you can see that, yeah, no B negative is showing up here. And I can actually submit this. And you can see that it sent me to a blank page, which is not cool. So I'm gonna teach you how to address that in a minute. But if I come into my Salesforce org now, I go to my open leads. There's my test lead that we just created. And you can see I did this all on the fly. It was very simple. Obviously, it's a very ugly form, but again, we'll address that in a minute. But you know, there's my name, my company. The background came in as good, right? Because that option value I had was, you know, good. Even though it was displaying the text "good guy," the value was good. I wanted to show you that there's a difference there. So the value is what's going to get sent to Salesforce, and you can see that it's been defaulted with a rating of hot. So I'm glad that our little test here, this little example that I ran, was successful, because we really don't have time to to do it again if I had messed it up. So let's go back to the slides for just 1 second. And okay, so just to review here, again, you can use different types of fields to capture your info. I think capturing text fields as pick lists is a very common one, or maybe radio buttons. And then modifying the pick list values, that's a very common one as well. Okay, so the next tip up here, make friends, sorry, a little typo there, make friends with a JavaScript-er. So somebody, a developer who knows JavaScript, a little bit of JavaScript goes a long way. Like even when I was just starting out, to be honest with you, with working with Web-to-Lead forms, I didn't know JavaScript. Now I have entire apps that are written in strictly JavaScript on the App Exchange, so I've come a long way. But at the beginning, I really didn't know any at all. And I picked up a little bit just so that I could, well, back then it was so I could create S controls, but it also helps me a lot with my forms. And you can actually, there's a lot of, like if you go to Google and you search, error checking, a web form error checking, or even Salesforce Web-to-Lead error checking, there's a lot of great resources that'll show you examples of that. So if you're somebody who's a little bit technical, doesn't know JavaScript, I would encourage you to go and check it out. Otherwise, you want to make friends with someone who knows JavaScript, because they're going to help you a lot with these forms. CSS, Cascading Style Sheets, that stands for, is going to help you as well. So you make friends with this person because they're going to be able to put error checking into your form. So meaning that, okay, you typed a number where we were expecting something else, or you can do a lot more fancy error checking, as well as required fields, right? Which is kind of like basic error checking, which is just, okay, did they put something in there or not? And then dynamic elements, like you click one thing and something else appears, or if you had dependent pick lists, things like that, you can make that work in your web form, but you need a little bit of JavaScript for that. And other extremely fancy things like pop-ups and hover help and whatever else you want to do. Obviously, you need a developer for that as well. But either way, if it's not you, if you're not the one who'd be learning JavaScript and knowing how to do this within your organization, find out who is and buy them a beer. And finally, the last tip here, polish the experience. And what I mean by that is there's just like a lot of loose ends. Like I actually exemplified one of them, actually probably a couple of them, but polishing the experience. Salesforce allows you to do a lot of cool things. Like the return URL is kind of a basic one actually, but so I didn't put a URL in there as a return URL. If you remember when I was creating the Web-to-Lead form, it asked me for a return URL, and I just left it blank like an idiot. And so you don't want to do that. You want to put in a URL that's going to go to a proper acknowledgement page, which just means when they hit submit, it's going to go to some sort of page that's going to say, thank you for submitting, or your feedback has been received, that sort of thing. And so that acknowledgement page, you can really put some thought into that and make sure you don't just send them back to your home page or something like that, because it'll confuse them and they'll say, was it submitted or not? Whatever. You might end up having them submit multiple forms. So personalize the auto response emails as much as possible using auto response rules. So this is what I was talking about. Salesforce gives you these cool features, like auto response rules can be pretty complicated, and in conjunction with email templates, which have can have pretty complicated formula fields in there, or you can even have Visualforce email templates. You can get pretty fancy. Like you could really impress your customers with even just simple things like, suppose somebody submits a form on a Friday, and you could actually have, either based on auto response rules, based on the created date, or otherwise you could do it like in the email template itself, maybe with using some sort of date formulas, and you could just tell them, in your response, you could end the email with "Have a nice weekend." Right. That's just a simple example that's kind of creative, and I'm sure pertaining to your business, you can think of a lot, much more useful cases for auto response rules, where they submit this type of feedback, you want to send them that type of an email. If they submit this type of feedback and they're this size organization, send them that email, right? And so you definitely want to leverage that as much as possible. And be smart about your default lead owner. So when you're in there customizing your lead object and you go to settings, there's a concept called default lead owner, which basically means if you're using auto response rules, if you're using assignment rules when these web leads come in, they'll obviously get assigned out. But if something doesn't get caught by those assignment rules, it's going to go to the default lead owner, and so you don't want that to just fall on deaf ears like that lead coming in. You want somebody to be notified. So make sure that it's not just some queue that nobody's monitoring. Put some thought into that. And finally, so I've said to kind of end the show here with a little bit of a plug, but it is important information that just for the simple fact that RingLead has a product called Unique Web-to-Lead, and it's the first and only product on the App Exchange that I'm aware of that is built specifically for keeping leads that come from the web unique. That is, finding duplicates, and it'll just update existing records instead of creating a duplicate. And it integrates nicely with Eloqua, Marketo, Pardot, and more. For the integrations, you can go to ringlead.com/integration, or just go to ringlead.com, click on integration. You can read about that if you're interested. We are pushing up just against our time limit, and so I wanted to just direct you to the RingLead blog. That's where I post about webinars like this. This is where that's where the recording would be. You can go there and see our past webinars and other blog posts that I posted, as well as the other experts on my team, and a RingLead group on LinkedIn. Just go to bit.ly. That's no www. Just go to bit.ly/RingLead. And that's a little shortcut. It'll bring you right to the group on LinkedIn. If you do have questions, I didn't have time to get to questions during the session. I apologize. But you can post any unanswered questions there, and we'll talk about it. And lastly, I do have a personal blog where I'll post all Salesforce geek-related materials at michaelforce.org. And again, I'm sorry I didn't have time to ask questions or comments or answer questions. But you can again, if you do have unanswered questions and you'd prefer not to go to LinkedIn and post them in the group, just find us on Twitter. Tweet at RingLead or at michaelforce. And that is it. I hope you guys found something, or ideally multiple things, useful in this session. Thanks a lot for joining, and I will see you next time.